There's a voice inside you, one that speaks quickly, sharply. It doesn't wait, it doesn't breathe. It reacts, and often it disguises itself as certainty, as clarity, as truth. But what if I told you that this voice is not your wisdom, it's your wound? We all know it well. The moment someone walks into the room and without saying a word, your mind whispers, "Look at them. Who do they think they are?" The instant you see a mistake and you feel a strange satisfaction in pointing it out. That flicker of superiority when someone else fails. We call it observation. We call it discernment. But more often than not, it's judgment. And it doesn't come from strength. It comes from pain. There's a reason why harsh opinions rise so easily. A reason why some of us live with an inner narrator who never pauses to ask, "Why am I so bothered?" That reason is this: judgment is often our defense against vulnerability. We criticize in others what we secretly fear in ourselves. I've met thousands of people across decades of speaking, teaching, listening, and I can tell you with deep tenderness, the most judgmental individuals are not the strongest. They are the most wounded. They carry battles you cannot see. And they build walls of opinion because the idea of being exposed, of being seen for who they really are, terrifies them. You might be wondering, but what's the harm in judgment? Isn't it human? And yes, it is. It's human to observe, to form impressions, to feel discomfort. But it becomes poison when it hardens into identity. When you begin to believe that your worth depends on how much better you are than others, that your voice only matters when it is louder, sharper, more right. What if I told you that the people who trigger you the most are your greatest mirrors? That the traits you most despise in others may point directly to the parts of yourself you haven't yet healed? That's not easy to hear, but it is a doorway to something sacred. Because behind every snap judgment is a deeper cry. I'm scared. I'm not enough. I don't know who I am if I stop criticizing. And until we face that cry, we will continue to speak not from wisdom, but from wounding. So today, let me ask you gently, what are you running from when you judge? Because the moment you pause, the moment you observe that inner reflex without feeding it, something shifts. You begin to step out of reaction. You begin to remember who you are beneath the layers of fear, comparison, and pride. And that, my friend, is where transformation begins. There's a reason why some people need to find fault in everything, why they cannot sit in silence without pointing out what's wrong, who's failing, or how someone else could be doing it better. That need, it's not power, it's protection. It's the armor we build when we fear being seen without our opinions to hide behind. I remember once speaking with a man who told me, "I just call things as I see them. That's honesty." But as I listened deeper, I realized what he called honesty was often hostility. It wasn't clarity, it was projection. Because he couldn't look at his own fears, he had to magnify the flaws of others. You see, emotional security is not loud. It does not need to shout down the room. It does not find satisfaction in humiliation. True inner strength listens more than it speaks, and when it speaks, it seeks understanding, not judgment. Maybe you grew up in a home where criticism was constant. Maybe love was earned through perfection, and mistakes were punished with silence or shame. If so, then of course your reflex became judgment. That was how you survived. You learned to point out flaws before others could point them out in you. You learned that safety came from staying one step ahead of rejection. But you're not that child anymore. You don't have to live from that reflex. You are allowed to pause, to breathe, to choose a different voice. One that says, maybe I don't need to label this moment. Maybe I can just let it be. And here's something no one may have told you before. You are not more valuable because you're more critical. You are not wiser because you can spot every flaw. In fact, the deepest wisdom often comes in the form of compassion. It sees the brokenness, but it does not define people by it. I think often of Christ's words not of condemnation, but of mercy. When faced with an angry crowd ready to stone a woman caught in failure, he said only this, "Let the one without sin cast the first stone." And one by one they walked away. Not because they suddenly changed their minds, but because they remembered their own humanity. What if every judgment you felt rising in you became a reminder not of their flaws, but of your need for healing? What if, instead of criticizing, you asked yourself, what is this discomfort showing me about my own story? Judgment wants to build walls, but healing builds windows. And through those windows, we begin to see ourselves and others clearly, gently, honestly. There's a kind of peace that only comes when you stop needing everyone else to be wrong. A quiet, sacred stillness that emerges when you finally release the habit of scanning the world for flaws. It's not indifference. It's not apathy. It's maturity. Because the truth is, judging others might feel good in the moment, but it leaves you hollow. It disconnects you. It puts you in a prison of superiority where intimacy cannot breathe. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to always be right? To always be the one who sees what others miss? There's no joy there, only performance, only distance. I once met a woman who shared something I never forgot. She said, "Dale, I used to think my standards made me noble, but really, they made me lonely." She had spent years being the sharpest mind in the room, but what she really longed for was to be held without having to be perfect. And no one could get close, because judgment was the armor she wore over her fear of not being enough. That struck me deeply, because so many of us do the same. We confuse discernment with disconnection. We think that being wise means being critical. But the wisest people I've ever met were also the gentlest. They carried a calm that said, "I've been broken too. I don't need to break you to feel strong." So I'll ask you something that might change your life if you let it. What would it look like if you let go of the role of the critic? Not forever, just for today, just for this conversation. Could you let someone speak without mentally correcting them? Could you witness a flaw and stay soft? Could you hear something you disagree with and remain present without needing to fix it? That's not weakness. That's the beginning of emotional mastery. You don't need to abandon your standards, but you can hold them with grace. You can live with deep values and still offer others the dignity of learning at their own pace. You can protect your peace without attacking theirs. And if you find yourself judging again, don't punish yourself. Just notice, breathe, return. That moment of awareness is not failure, it's freedom. Because now you're no longer run by the reflex. You're choosing. You're awake. And in that awareness, healing happens. You begin to treat others the way your younger self always wished to be treated, with kindness before correction, with space before opinions, with love before labels. And suddenly, relationships open up. Hearts soften. The noise inside you quiets. Not because you've compromised your truth, but because you've finally come home to it. There is something sacred in restraint, in choosing silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because your soul no longer needs to prove anything. That's when you know you've grown, not when your judgments disappear, but when they no longer control you. Judgment is a habit, a reflex, but so is grace. And grace is the discipline of the spiritually mature. It looks at imperfection and chooses presence over punishment. It listens to foolishness and still honors the speaker's dignity. It walks into rooms filled with noise, adds stillness, not more sound. Maybe you've spent your life surrounded by people who only saw your flaws, who taught you that your worth depended on appearances, performance, perfection. And so you learned to see others through the same lens. You became what you were exposed to. And now, as an adult, you wonder why intimacy feels distant, why connection always slips through your fingers. Here's the truth. It's hard to get close to someone who's always holding a measuring stick. But you can put it down now. You're allowed to let others be in process. You're allowed to let yourself be in process. You don't need to understand every choice. You don't need to correct every flaw. You just need to be here, present, honest, open. That is where trust grows. That is where healing begins. I think of a verse from the Psalms, one I return to often. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. It's not a prayer for judgment, but for clarity, for the kind of self-awareness that leads to liberation, not shame. Because when you ask life to search you, instead of scanning the world for who's wrong, you awaken. You become grounded, and you begin to see others not as threats, but as reflections. Their pain becomes familiar, their mistakes forgivable, their differences sacred. And here's the mystery. The less you judge others, the less you judge yourself. You become softer, not weaker. You become bolder, not louder. You begin to live from the soul, not the wound. Let this be the day you catch the judgment reflex before it escapes your lips. The day you take a breath before you take a stance. The day you choose curiosity over criticism. Because every time you do that, you are not just changing a moment, you are becoming someone new, someone freer, someone wiser, someone whole. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me long ago. You are not defined by your opinions. You are not made wise by your corrections. You are not more valuable because you're the one who always sees clearly. Your worth was never supposed to come from how well you judge. It was always meant to flow from how well you love. And love, true love, is not blind. It sees everything, but it chooses patience. It chooses humility. It chooses presence over pride and quietness over control. This is the invitation in front of you, to trade the judgment reflex for something deeper, for a calm that doesn't need to react, for a clarity that doesn't destroy, for a strength that doesn't hide behind sharp words and cold analysis. You don't have to keep carrying the need to be above others. That weight was never yours to bear. Lay it down right here, right now. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to stand without it. And yes, you will still feel the reflex rise. Yes, you'll still hear the voice whispering, "They're wrong, you're better." But now you will know. That voice is not your truth. It's your old fear, and you are no longer ruled by it. I believe that real transformation begins in these small, sacred moments, when you choose to stay soft in the face of discomfort, when you choose to be still instead of superior, when you choose to let someone else be in process without needing to rush their growth. That's what makes you powerful. That's what sets you apart. Not how you judge, but how you hold space. So from this day forward, walk with a new awareness, not of others' faults, but of your own healing. And every time you feel the urge to correct, to criticize, to control, pause, breathe, smile inwardly, and remember, you don't judge others because you're above them. You judge them because deep down you fear you are not enough. But you are enough. You always were. And the more you believe that, the less you will need to prove anything to anyone. You'll simply live, freely, calmly, fully. That, my friend, is the beginning of wisdom.